All right, the Meiji era, or the Meiji Restoration. What this was the emperor in Japan was put back in power, so given power over the shogun. But the real reason for this was to modernize the nation. The emperor was just a figurehead, just someone who had a title and was put in charge. But actually, what happens is the Meiji in Japan modernize. And what happens is many of the families who start taking power are actually families of modern-day corporations like Toyota and Nissan. And they modernize and they industrialize, which will allow Japan to become a power in this era of industrialization. Prefectures were in Japan. Feudalism ends with the Meiji Restoration, and it's not the daimyos who are in charge of these lands anymore. It's now central government officials who are in charge. And it is a way to break up Japan and to have the central government have more power in Japan, where before it was feudalism, where the daimyos had power and had more growing crops in their land. And this will also allow Japan to become more centrally powered and become more powerful in the industrial era. The Charter Oath in Japan, or the 5 Charter Oath, is what will basically get rid of feudalism and will begin the Meiji Restoration. So it's basically trying to modernize Japan and for Japan to become a more modern nation in an era of their military and also in industry as well. The Sino-Japanese War, the first Sino-Japanese War, was a war over the influence in Korea. And Japan was able to win, which will make them more influential in Korea. They're also able to take over the land of Taiwan from China. And this really, again, shows how Japan is becoming the major power in Asia at this time over China. Opium, which was discussed earlier in the Opium War, is a flower that grows, a poppy, which has a drug inside of it, which is actually a drug today used for heroin. And this is grown in this era in India and is then shipped to China for trade, so Europeans, especially the British, can have more trade of goods in China. The Treaty of Nanking is the first of what will be called many unequal treaties between China and Britain. And in this treaty, Britain are able to get the city of Hong Kong, which they will rule for about 100 years. And also they will be able to get access to 5 ports. British also get the right of extraterritoriality, which means they are not subject to the Chinese laws in China. This is a treaty that comes after the first Opium War, which really shows that Britain is showing their power in China and has a lot of influence over the Chinese government, which China cannot control because of, well, mainly Britain's Industrial Revolution and more powerful weapons. Spheres of influence means that a country doesn't formally take over another country, but they have influence over that country. Spheres of influence can be seen in China in this time period, and will also be seen in imperialism in many other lands as well. Spheres of influence, basically in China, for example, means that Britain, example, during the Opium Wars and after this era, is able to have a lot of power or control over China. Japan as well will come in and will try to get their sphere of influence and increase it. So having a sphere of influence means you don't formally take over the land, but you're able to influence what that country does. The open door policy is a term that the United States originally used, which was to allow a system of trade to be open to all countries in China, that all countries would be able to have trade with China. This cartoon kind of shows an example of what it was in reality, though. The open door policy was basically a policy where many other foreign powers were able to come in and divide China up for its resources at this time. We can also see here another picture of the open door policy. China right there being a dragon that's been slayed, with other powers like Russia. I believe we have Britain over here, Italy, Spain, the United States, all trying to divide up China, the resources and everything that this major world power for so long had, here portrayed as a dragon that has been slayed. A zibatsu, and I am probably saying that wrong, I'll need to correct my pronunciation. A zibatsu is a large Chinese conglomeration or business. These are big companies that during the Meiji Restoration and industrialization were able to build and become strong. Many of these today are companies we think of like Nissan and Toyota, which the government allowed to grow strong, start their own industrial. In fact, the government backed them and allowed a lot of their basically upper class people to come in, help build these new conglomerations in Japan for them to become strong and for them to become business models. So they have influence and size. They have a lot of power in Japan during this time period and even today. General would be basically like a retired Japanese statesman or someone like a general, someone who had power, considering like the founding fathers of Japan, who would have like a lot of power that wasn't necessarily given to them, but would have this power and could advise the emperor and in the Meiji Restoration and beyond in Japan. That's all our words. Not so bad for this time. Good luck, guys. We're getting closer. We're getting there. So keep up the great work.